r/Nosleep. Posted by u/loop58. I took a night watchman job at my local mall. I wish I hadn't. My name is Darren and I'm a college student. I recently moved out of my parents' house and needed a job to pay rent while I am still earning my degree. I had been constantly refreshing job pages to try and find something that I qualified for, when one listing caught my eye. Night watchman needed at Cottonberry Mall, pay starting at $50 per hour. I thought that is ridiculous pay for at least seemingly, simple position. I called the number and after only one ring someone picked up. Their voice was low and rough like sandpaper across my ears. "I assume you're calling about the night watchman position that was posted." "Yeah, I am. The only question I have is when can you start?" "What? Just like that I got the job?" "Look, we need this position filled tonight and we're operating on a first-come first-served basis, and as long as you can follow basic instructions, you've got all the qualifications needed." "Well, I guess I'll take it," I said. "Excellent," he said as he hung up the phone. Later that day I received an email containing more details. It read, "Hello Darren, we are excited to welcome you to the Cottonberry family of employees. Your shift begins tonight at 8 p.m. sharp. You may wear anything you want, but you must wear the security badge that will be on the security desk when you come in for your shift, which ends at 7 a.m. There will also be a white binder in the drawer that contains the rules and information regarding your duties as a night watchman. Please read it thoroughly and as soon as you come in, we look forward to seeing you tonight." I arrived at the mall at 7:50 p.m. I was very familiar with the layout of the mall because I had shopped there all of my life. I got to the security office at 7:59 p.m. and got out the binder that I was told to read. It started with a light introduction and then progressed into a set of 9 rules for the night. I assumed these would be things like, lock the doors, call if anyone breaks in, and make rounds as needed, but I was wrong. Rule 1, at 8:30 p.m. begin your rounds. You will hear a loud scream emanate through the mall, ignore it and continue your sweep. Rule 2, after you finish your rounds return to the security office, however you must be back in the office at 9 p.m. No exceptions. I thought to myself, why would it matter when I get back into the office? I continued reading. Rule 3, at 9:45 p.m. you will hear a banging on the door. It will get more intense as time goes on. Once the door begins to give way, you must write 1OP0 your 7562 PBB %joke %6+ on a piece of paper and slide it under the door. If done correctly the banging should cease. If the banging does not stop then start praying to any god that you believe in. This sent shivers down my spine and I felt cold like I was standing in a freezer. Rule 4, at 10:30 you must do another sweep. While doing so you will see an old man walking through the mall. If he waves at you, wave back and continue your sweep. If he gives you a thumbs up, sprint back to the security office, lock the door, and don't exit until 11:04 p.m. Rule 5, you must be back in the security office before 11:49 p.m. At that time you will hear lots of sounds on the outside of the office. Do not open the security office door before 11:53 p.m. for any reason. Rule 6, at 12 a.m. you will see a knife appear on the table. Use this knife to draw blood, enough to fill up one of the cups behind you. I looked back and saw that the cups were about the size of a small shot glass. After you fill the cup up with blood, place it outside the door. Wait 10 minutes and open the door. If the blood is gone you may go back inside the security office. If it is still there, take the cup and pour it into a trash can in the food court. If the trash can spits it out, run back to the security office and hide under the desk until 2:13 a.m. Rule 7, at 3:05 a.m. you must begin your next sweep. However you will see this. I looked down at the picture and it was a creature with the body of a man with the head of a crocodile with arms sticking out of its back. Once you see this you must close your eyes and stop moving. Do not open your eyes until you hear him say "keep me in mind," after which you must come back to the security office. Rule 8, at 4:30 a.m. you will hear what seems to be a small child crying outside the door to the security office. At that time you must call #999 9999 using your personal phone or the one in the office. Rule 9, at 5 a.m. you must begin your final sweep. Once you leave the security office you will indemnity notice that the whole mall is covered in body parts. You must ignore the sight and the smell and continue as if nothing wrong. You might see the creature shown above feasting on the body parts, and if you do it is of the utmost importance to your safety that you. The rest of the note was just smeared so badly that it was illegible. There is no way any of this is real, I thought to myself. This has to be the company trying to scare the new guy. I glanced at the clock and it read 8:21 p.m. 1 minute later there was a call on the phone in the office. I assumed this would be the company calling to tell me that these absurd rules were just a practical joke. However, that was not who was on the other line. "Hello," I said in a low voice. "Don't bother trying to talk to me, this is a pre-recorded message. You may look at the rules and think that they are ridiculous and a big joke, but I want to tell you they're not. You must follow all the rules to a T, because if you don't you'll end up like me, dead." Wow, I thought to myself, they are really trying to take this joke to the next level. At 8:30 p.m. I grabbed my security badge and went for my first sweep, expecting nothing from those absurd rules. I walked through the whole mall inspecting to ensure everything was in order. I was feeling good because I only had one store left to examine and no scream, so I assumed there was nothing to be afraid of, and then it happened. The air went cold and then there was an ear-piercing shriek that seemed to emanate from underneath me. I couldn't move, fear had rendered my body stiff and lifeless like a statue. When I finally got the courage to move, I looked at the clock. It read 8:56 p.m. Fearing breaking another rule, I sprinted back to the security office. I ran faster than I ever thought possible, and when I reached the security office I was so out of breath that I felt like I had just run 100 miles. Look, I am man enough to admit that I started sobbing uncontrollably when it hit me that these rules weren't nonsense, they were real. After my good cry, I assured myself that all of these rules were followed to a T. Then it hit me, they weren't done. The final instruction was so scribbled out that I couldn't read it. I began to panic, thinking that my life was over. "I need to get a grip, I'll cross that bridge when I come to it," I said. I looked at the time, it was 9:44 p.m. 1 minute until the banging starts, I guess. As the clock struck 9:45 I began to hear a light tapping on the door. It was barely audible at first, but it didn't take long for the tapping to become a hard thumping. I quickly glanced at the rules to get what I needed to write. I grabbed a pen and a sticky note and began writing. As I did I began to hear an extremely low-pitched moan accompanying the banging. As my eyes watered and my hands sweat I wrote the combination of letters and numbers that the note outlined. As the door seemed ready to break off its hinges I slid the note under the door. Immediately after I did, the banging stopped and I breathed a sigh of relief, especially because the rules stated that this wasn't a guarantee. After a while I finally worked up the nerve to get up from my fetal position and check the time. It read 10:27 p.m. I need to get going on my second sweep, I thought to myself. I slowly creaked open the door and locked it behind me, all while shaking uncontrollably. I began my sweep, while keeping a watchful eye for the old man the instructions spoke of. As I turned the corner to pass the ice cream stand, I saw him. He was standing about 20 feet in front of me, however he didn't seem to notice my presence. That all changed when I took a breath. The old man immediately turned his head towards me, making a loud cracking sound in the process. The old man didn't have a face, it was just overlapped flesh with no eyes, nose, or mouth. I recoiled in horror at this sight. I wanted to run away with every fiber of my being, but I held my ground because of the fear of what would happen if I disobeyed the rules. The old man slowly raised his hand, each joint cracking as he did so, when he sent me a very awkward wave that seemed almost robotic. I then gave him a wave just as I was instructed to. At that moment the old man's arm fell off. "What the hell?" I shouted as he picked up his arm and ran away faster than anything human could possibly run. Moments later I heard what sounded like a crash and a loud scream of pain. At this my blood ran cold and again I lacked the nerve to move as I stood there in the darkness for what felt like hours. I then uncrumpled the paper that held the rules from my pocket to check what I needed to do next. I then looked at the time, it was 11 p.m. While I still had some time before I needed to go back to the security office, I wasted none of it sprinting back. I didn't want to take any chances. When I got back, as odd as it may seem given the circumstances, I started scrolling through social media, looking at all my friends and family's posts about how happy their lives were. "I'm stuck in a crazy nightmare, wish you were here," I joked to myself. A little later I was lost in thought when I heard a voice on the other end of the door scream, "Help me, help me, is anyone in there? There's a monster out here, it's gonna get me." This shocked me awake and I quickly brought out the instructions detailing what I was supposed to do. I then remembered that I do nothing and then tried my best to ignore it. The man outside kept begging and pleading for me to open the door, while I did my best to tune him out. After about a minute of the man crying and begging to be let in, it turned silent for a second. Then I heard an extremely low and loud voice say, "You didn't let him in, you heartless fool." The next thing I heard was the horrible sound of flesh being ripped and bones cracking as the thing behind the door said, That is delicious, so sweet and full-bodied." Terror began to envelop my entire being as the monster behind the door feasted on the man who begged me for sanctity. "Open the door right now, and you will be spared, but if you don't I'll break down this insignificant barrier and feast on your flesh too," it said while the sounds of engorging continued. I tried to block out the terrifying sounds that accompanied the monster's constant threats. After I thought my terror couldn't reach any higher level, the monster said. "I gave you a chance, now I'm coming in and you will know true pain." The door began to give way as the thing behind the door pushed and pushed. I panicked and tried to block the door with my body weight, but to no real avail. After one heavy heave from the other side of the door, I was thrust back. As I sat there frozen with fear, the door popped off its hinges and I saw nothing, no mutilated body, no monster, just an empty, normal-looking hallway bathed in darkness. My heart was beating so fast I thought it might burst out of my chest. I again checked the time and it read 11:53 p.m. By the time I was able to somewhat refocus myself, the knife mentioned in Rule 6 was on the table. Had it not been for the previous events I would have never even considered doing this, but now I was totally on board. I took the, admittedly clean-looking, blade and made a somewhat deep slit down my palm. I barely registered the pain of the cut because of the adrenaline I had, and I began to fill up one of the plastic cups, as the binder commanded. After it was full of blood I placed it outside the security office door and waited. After 10 minutes I opened the door to find the cup of blood still there. I knew what I had to do next. I picked up the cup very carefully, as not to spill any of it, and proceeded to the food court to dispose of it in one of the trash cans. I poured the blood into the, normal-looking, trash can. At first nothing happened and I assumed that the trash can accepted my offering, but I was wrong. As I walked away I heard an audible bleck emerge from the trash can as it spit up the blood. I didn't hesitate to start booking it back to the security office. As I glanced behind me, I saw the trash can sprout 4 legs and 2 arms and begin chasing after me. The limbs were long but muscular in appearance, but it wasn't very fast and was rather clumsy. I however was anything but. I sprinted back to the security office and slid under the desk with pinpoint precision. I sat there, arms wrapped around my knees trying not to make a sound and alert that monstrosity of my presence. As I waited I heard it stumbling around the mall, but it eventually made its way to the security office, which had no door. It came in, contorting its body to fit through the 79 by 24-inch door frame. It began to examine the security office by looking under chairs and in file cabinets while I was under the desk praying that it overlooks my hiding spot. Honestly I couldn't tell you what happened next. I think I blacked out from sheer overwhelming terror, but when I came to, I again checked the time on my phone. It took me a minute to stop my hand from shaking so I could read the time on my phone. It read 3:01 a.m. With my body shaking and my eyes moist with tears, I ventured out for my next sweep per the instructions. This was the sweep where I would encounter what I dubbed Crocodile Man. I walked through them all anticipating the appearance of Crocodile Man, but it never happened. I walked through the entire mall twice and this creature was nowhere to be seen. I was both relieved and terrified. Relieved because I don't have to deal with Crocodile Man, and terrified because the instructions didn't cover this as a possibility. So with nothing else to do I headed back to the security office. Out of nowhere I then heard a child crying, so I got out my phone to call the number the instructions detailed. Once I opened my phone, I noticed that it was only 4:01 a.m. This isn't supposed to happen for another 30 minutes, I thought to myself. The crying grew louder and louder, so I decided to just call the number eerily. I dialed #999-9999 on my phone and after 3 rings I heard an ear-piercing beep that made me drop my phone. It was even loud when the phone was on the floor, but it wasn't even on speakerphone. The child's scream became even more distorted and loud as the noise seemed to upset it. The cacophony of the screaming and beeping was so loud that I had to cover my ears so my eardrums didn't burst. As the noise began to reach its peak and my ears started to bleed, both noises ceased and all I could hear was ringing. I felt lightheaded as the blood dripped down from my ears. It took me almost an hour to recuperate, but I did eventually recover, at least somewhat. The time read 4:57 a.m. and I knew this was where I was on my own because the instructions didn't finish this part. As the clock struck 5 a.m. I stared into the hallway leading to the mall. "I don't see any body parts," I nervously said. This didn't last long as the moment after I blinked I saw them. Everywhere I could see was covered in arms, legs, heads, and other parts that I won't mention. The smell alone was enough to make me almost vomit, but I was able to keep the contents of my stomach intact. As I trekked through the rotting corpses and viscera to make my sweep, I saw it. The Crocodile Man was in the middle of the food court, gorging on the decaying flesh surrounding it. The picture didn't do this thing justice. It was the size of a pickup truck and much scarier in person. I froze in that moment and as the monster shoveled the contents of the floor and walls into its mouth. Once it had eaten its fill it vomited. The sight of the rotting flesh mixing with the fluids of the beast's stomach made me lose my lunch too. The noise made by my regurgitation alerted it to my presence. With the speed of a cheetah on Adderall, the beast reached my position and hoisted it up with its front arms. I thought it was going to devour me whole when the monster uttered, "You didn't find me earlier." I said nothing. "Don't you have anything to say for yourself?" it said as it shook me violently. "I couldn't find you, I searched the whole building twice," I said with a weak and timid voice. "You didn't look up, did you? You were supposed to inspect the entire building, that means floors, walls, and ceilings," it said. "Are you going to eat me?" I quivered. "No, at least not all of you," the beast said. Before I could say anything else, it bit down on my foot with its crocodilian jaws. It was over before I knew it. The monster took half of my left foot and I bled out, as my blood mixed with the blood leaking from the body parts that painted the floors, walls, and ceilings. With the speed at which it approached, the monster climbed up the wall of body parts and clung to the roof, marching off to where I couldn't see or hear it anymore. I let out a scream of pain as I held my mutilated foot. I sat there for what must have been almost 2 hours when a warm, orange glow illuminated my face. It was a flaming torch with a note attached. It read, "A little gift from me to you, keep me in mind." I knew what it wanted me to do. I plunged the torch into my eviscerated foot so as to cauterize it so I could at least walk to my car and drive home. As the clock struck 7 a.m. I blinked and all the body parts, as well as the torch, was gone, but my foot was still in shambles. With the speed of a Usain Bolt, I hobbled out of that wretched place, into my car and sped myself to the hospital. When the doctor asked what happened to my foot, I said it was a chainsaw accident. This seemed to fool the doctor. About a week after that night, I got a letter in the mail from Cottonberry Mall. It was a check for my $550 I had earned for that night. I never expected this to come, but here it is. This angered me, so I called the Cottonberry Employment Office to get some answers. "Hello, you've reached the Cottonberry Employment Office, how may I help you?" a woman said with a pleasant tone. "What the K is wrong with you sending your night watchman to die?" I shouted. What she said next chilled me to the bone. "Sorry sir, our security system is automated, we don't hire night watchmen."